The auction block stood crooked and splintered, a scar of timber in the heart of the dusty frontier town. Heat pressed down like an anvil, shimmering above the wooden platform where men gathered, voices loud and sharp. A trader barked prices with a grin that held no mercy, his hand gripping a chain tied to the wrist of the girl who stood before them. She was young, her face smeared with dirt and bruises, yet her posture held a defiance that unsettled the crowd. Their laughter carried cruelty, but her dark eyes burned with quiet fire. The trader yanked her forward, lifting her chin for display as if she were cattle, not flesh and blood. $2, he called again, his tone impatient, mocking. Some men chuckled, some spat, and others turned away altogether. To them she was worthless, too thin, too proud, too wild to tame. The girl scanned the jeering faces, her chest rising and falling, searching for even a glimmer of humanity among them. But all she found was indifference and contempt. Her wrists ached beneath rusted iron, and her heart sank with each passing moment of silence. In the back, boots crunched against the grit of the street. A cowboy stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the boards. Eli Boone was no stranger to the cruelty of men. He had ridden long enough to see what greed and hate could carve into the land. His jaw tightened as his eyes locked on hers. Unlike the others, he did not look away. He saw the chains, the bruises, the fear beneath her stillness, and something else, something unbroken. The crowd murmured, their gazes flicking between him and the girl, sensing trouble crackle like lightning in the air. Eli's hand moved slow but deliberate. He reached into his coat, drew out 2 silver coins, and let them fall heavy onto the platform. They rang sharp against the wood, louder than any voice. The trader blinked, startled, then smirked as if he'd won. With a rough jerk, he let the chains fall. The clatter echoed like a gunshot, and the girl gasped, clutching her wrists. For the first time in years, her skin was free from iron's bite. She stared at Eli with wide, uncertain eyes, unable to comprehend why a stranger would buy her freedom. The townsfolk muttered, suspicion stirring. Whispers slithered like snakes. Why'd he waste coin on her? Apache's cursed. He'll regret it. But Eli Boone didn't waver. He turned steady as stone and held out his hand. The girl hesitated, trembling, then placed her fingers in his. Rough and calloused though his palm was, it held a strange gentleness. Together they stepped off the block. The crowd parted reluctantly, their faces twisted in judgment and disdain. Eli ignored them all, his focus fixed on the woman who walked at his side, her every step both fragile and defiant. They crossed the street, the hot dust swirling around their boots. The girl glanced back once, her gaze meeting the platform where her chains still lay twisted in the sun. A memory of captivity, left behind in a heap of rusted metal. She inhaled sharply, her chest tight with the strange weight of freedom. It felt unreal, like a dream that might dissolve at any moment. Eli noticed her hesitation, slowing his stride so she wouldn't stumble. His silence was steadying, a shield against the stares that clung to them like barbed wire. For the first time, she wasn't alone. When they reached his horse tethered at the post, Eli paused. The animal snorted, stamping against the heat. He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a canteen, and offered it to her. Her hands shook as she gripped it, tilting it toward her parched lips. The water was warm, but it tasted like salvation. She drank until her chest ached, then lowered it slowly, whispering something in her tongue, a prayer or perhaps a thank you. Eli said nothing, but his eyes softened. He lifted her carefully onto the horse's back, his hands steady, then mounted behind, reins in his grip. The town shrank behind them as Eli guided the horse onto the trail. The desert stretched wide, harsh, unforgiving, but freer than any wooden post or crowded street. Wind tugged at her hair, carrying the dust of the past away with it. She clutched the edge of his coat, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in disbelief. Every hoofbeat carried her further from the jeers, the chains, the shame of the auction block. She dared not speak, fearing the silence would shatter the fragile new reality. Yet beneath the desert sky, a seed of trust had begun to stir. Eli's thoughts churned as they rode. He had not planned this, had not walked into town seeking to save a stranger. But something in her gaze, fierce and broken all at once, had ignited a fire he couldn't ignore. He had seen men bought and sold like cattle before, and it never sat right in his soul. Today, he had chosen to do something about it. The risk didn't matter. Whether it was the law, the town's whispers, or the ghosts of his own past, Eli knew trouble would follow. But looking at her, he knew it was worth it. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in gold and blood red, they stopped near a rocky outcrop. Eli slid down, helping her to the ground. Her legs wavered unsteady from both exhaustion and disbelief. He unrolled a blanket from his pack, spreading it on the earth, and gestured for her to sit. She obeyed slowly, her movements guarded but no longer resistant. The desert wind cooled against their skin, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. For the first time, she allowed herself to exhale fully, her body easing into the fragile safety of his presence. Eli crouched by the fire he built, striking flint until sparks caught and flames grew. Shadows stretched long against the desert floor, flickering as if alive. She watched him quietly, her hands folded in her lap, wrists still sore from the iron's bite. He glanced up once, catching her gaze, and offered a small nod. She didn't smile, not yet, but her eyes softened, the firelight dancing in their depths. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but she knew this: when the world had turned its back, he had not. That truth burned brighter than the fire. In the silence between them, a bond began to take root. Fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and felt the cool desert air where chains had once pressed cruelly into her skin. Freedom was strange, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. Eli tended the fire, his silhouette strong against the glow, a man of few words but heavy purpose. As night settled around them, she finally allowed her weary body to rest. Though the desert stretched endless and wild, for the first time in years, she did not feel afraid. The desert night stretched wide and endless, stars scattered like broken glass across a velvet sky. The air carried a chill that bit deeper than the day's heat, wrapping the land in silence. Near the rocky outcrop, a small fire crackled, its glow soft against the darkness. The Apache woman sat close to the flames, Eli's worn coat draped around her shoulders, its weight both protective and unfamiliar. She had carried chains for so long that even simple kindness felt strange, unreal, as though she might wake at any moment and find herself back in captivity. Her eyes studied him, cautious but curious, as he crouched near the fire, the flames painting his face in gold and shadow. Eli's features were rough, marked by years of wind, sun, and hardship, but there was something steady in his gaze. She wondered why he had done it, why he had given up coins when the world around them had given her nothing. Freedom was a word she had not dared believe in, yet here she sat, no iron on her wrists, no jeers ringing in her ears. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. Eli stirred the fire, sending sparks into the night sky. Finally, his voice cut through the stillness, low and even. "Don't owe me nothing," he said, eyes never leaving the flames. "You deserve to live free." His words carried no demand, no expectation, only truth spoken like fact. She blinked, taken aback. Men she had known in the past had spoken with greed, command, or cruelty, but never with such simplicity. She clutched the coat tighter around herself, warmth sinking into her bones. Something fragile shifted inside her chest, a crack in the wall she had built to survive. The fire snapped, a log collapsing inward. For a long moment neither of them spoke. She listened to the desert wind whistling softly through the rocks, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. Slowly, her lips curved, unsure at first, then stronger, into the faintest of smiles. It was fragile, hesitant, but real. Eli saw it, though he did not comment. He simply leaned back on his hands, tipping his hat lower to shade his eyes from the flames. Yet inside him something stirred. In that small, uncertain smile lay the seed of trust, and perhaps something more. The night deepened, wrapping them in quiet companionship. She shifted closer to the fire, her dark eyes reflecting the light, and glanced again at Eli. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both strength and tremor. The word was heavy, full of everything she could not yet say. Why save me? Why spend silver? Why risk yourself? Eli exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing against his ribs. Because someone had to, he answered, his tone rough but honest. Didn't sit right, watching you treated like less than human. He didn't look at her, but the truth lingered, solid and unshakable. Her heart pounded as she absorbed his words. In her world, mercy had been rare, nearly extinct, and here was a man who spoke as if her freedom had been the only choice worth making. Tears stung her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she drew the coat tighter, letting the silence stretch once more. Eli reached for the canteen, offering it to her. She accepted, her hands brushing his, the warmth of his touch startling in its gentleness. That small contact carried more power than any chain that had bound her. For once, she felt seen. The fire burned lower, embers glowing soft red. Coyotes sang in the distance, their voices mournful against the quiet plains. She leaned against a rock, exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders, but fear no longer gnawed at her chest. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Eli watched, his hat tipped forward, guarding both the fire and the woman who now rested beneath its glow. He had spent so many nights alone in the wilderness, silence his only companion. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the silence carried meaning. As she drifted towards sleep, she murmured words in her own tongue, soft and rhythmic like a prayer. Eli didn't understand, but he listened, the sound carrying across the flames like music. He wondered what story lay behind her scars, what memories hid in her silence. But he asked no questions. Tonight was not for digging into pain. It was for letting the weight of chains fall away. She shifted slightly, and her hand brushed his coat sleeve as if reaching unconsciously for comfort. He let it be, guarding her not with words, but with quiet presence. Hours passed and the desert grew colder. Eli fed the fire, watching the sparks climb into the star-strewn sky. He thought of his own past, of times when he had stood alone on the edge of darkness, wondering if anyone would care if he vanished. He had learned to carry that emptiness like a saddle. But tonight, as he looked at the woman beside him, he realized something had shifted. By freeing her, he had freed himself from a part of that loneliness. The weight he had carried for so long seemed lighter now, replaced by something new, something hopeful. The horizon slowly began to pale, dawn pushing back the shadows. The first rays of sunlight brushed across the dunes, painting them in shades of gold. The fire had burned low, little more than glowing coals. Eli rose, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. The woman stirred, blinking awake. For a moment, confusion flashed across her face, then recognition softened her gaze. She sat up, brushing hair from her face, and looked at him with eyes no longer clouded by fear. Between them, something unspoken passed, an understanding deeper than words, born in the silence of survival and trust. Eli offered her a hand, and she took it, rising unsteadily to her feet. The coat slipped from her shoulders, but he caught it, draping it gently back around her. Their eyes met, and for the first time she did not look away. In that shared gaze, there was no master or captive, no savior or rescued, only two souls who had found each other in the vast emptiness of the frontier. Eli felt his chest tighten, not with burden, but with possibility. 2 silver coins had bought her freedom, but what blossomed now was something neither of them had expected. As the sun climbed higher, they prepared to leave the rocky shelter, the desert stretching wide before them. Eli mounted his horse, then extended a hand to help her up. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his, trusting him to steady her. She settled behind him, her arms circling his waist for balance. The horse began to move, its hooves beating a steady rhythm across the sand. The wind swept against them, carrying away the ashes of the night's fire. What had begun with chains and coin had become something far greater, the quiet birth of love.